France, November 1944. The sky is a low, gray ceiling, pressing down on a battered patch of farmland outside Metz. Mud clings to the boots of American infantrymen as they scramble for cover, the air alive with the staccato rattle of machine gun fire. In the center of the chaos, a Sherman tank sits half-sunken in a shell crater, its olive-drab hull streaked with soot and rain. Inside, the crew is tense but focused. The loader's hands are raw from hours of feeding belts into the .50 caliber Browning atop the turret. The gunner's eyes are fixed on the hedgerow ahead, where muzzle flashes flicker like angry fireflies. The tank commander barks orders, his voice hoarse but steady. Then, as the enemy counterattack intensifies, something remarkable happens. The machine gun keeps firing. Not for a minute or 10, but for hour after hour, its rhythm unbroken, its barrel glowing red. Outside, a group of GIs watch in disbelief. They'd laughed at the loader's homemade ammo belt, stitched together from scraps and ingenuity. Now, as the Sherman's guns hold the line, the laughter fades, replaced by awe, and the realization that sometimes survival depends on the courage to improvise. By late 1944, the Western Front was a landscape of mud, ruin, and relentless pressure. The Allies had broken out from Normandy, but every mile gained was paid for in blood and sweat. The German army, battered but unbroken, fought a stubborn defense across France and into the heart of the Reich. For the men of the U.S. Army, the war was a daily test of endurance, ingenuity, and nerve. At the heart of the Allied advance was the M4 Sherman tank. Fast, reliable, and easy to produce, the Sherman became the backbone of American armored forces. Its silhouette, rounded turret, broad tracks, and long gun was a familiar sight from the hedgerows of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes. But for all its strengths, the Sherman was not invincible. German anti-tank guns, Panzerfausts, and the dreaded Tiger tanks made every advance a gamble. Inside each Sherman, 5 men worked in cramped, noisy conditions. The commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver formed a team bound by trust and routine. Their world was a metal box, thick with the smell of oil, cordite, and sweat. Every man had a job, and every job mattered. The tank's main gun was its fist, but its machine guns, one coaxial, one hull-mounted, and the .50 caliber Browning on the turret, were its shield. These weapons kept enemy infantry at bay, broke up ambushes, and bought precious seconds in the chaos of battle. Ammunition was the lifeblood of the Sherman. Each tank carried hundreds of rounds for its main gun and thousands for its machine guns. But in the heat of combat, resupply was never guaranteed. Convoys could be delayed, supply lines cut, and the chaos of battle often meant that crews had to make do with what they had. The standard issue for the .50 caliber Browning was a metal ammunition box loaded with a belt of linked cartridges. In theory, it was a simple system. In practice, it was a source of constant frustration. Belts jammed. Links broke. Boxes ran dry at the worst possible moment. The machine gun, meant to be a last line of defense, could fall silent just when it was needed most. Tank crews learned to improvise, splicing belts together, scavenging links from damaged vehicles, and inventing their own solutions to keep the guns firing. In the field, necessity was the mother of invention. The men who fought in Shermans were a cross-section of America. Farm boys from Iowa, mechanics from Detroit, students from New York. They brought with them a spirit of resourcefulness, a willingness to bend the rules if it meant staying alive. The Army taught them the basics, but survival often depended on what they learned from each other. Tricks passed from crew to crew, stories swapped over campfires and in the shadow of burning tanks. It was in this world, muddy, dangerous, and unpredictable, that one loader's homemade ammo belt would become the stuff of legend. At first, it was a joke, a patchwork of canvas and wire that drew smirks from the old hands. But as the fighting ground on, and the need for sustained fire grew ever more desperate, the line between regulation and innovation began to blur. The story of the homemade ammo belt is not just about a single battle or a single tank. It is about the spirit of adaptation that defined the Allied war effort, a spirit forged in the crucible of combat, where every second counted and every bullet could mean the difference between life and death. The M4 Sherman was a marvel of mass production, but its design reflected the compromises of war. American doctrine emphasized speed, maneuverability, and overwhelming numbers. The Sherman's armor was adequate, its firepower respectable, but its greatest strength was its reliability and the ease with which it could be repaired and supplied. Yet, for the men inside, the difference between theory and reality was measured in seconds under fire. Machine guns were a Sherman's lifeline in close combat. The 50 caliber Browning M2, mounted atop the turret, was a fearsome weapon, capable of cutting down infantry, disabling vehicles, and even damaging light armor. But its effectiveness depended on a steady supply of ammunition. The standard metal ammo boxes held 100 rounds each, linked together in belts. In the chaos of battle, these boxes could be awkward to handle, especially when the tank was buttoned up and the loader had to feed the gun from inside the cramped turret. Problems multiplied in the field. Mud and grit fouled the links. The vibration of the tank's movement could shake belts loose or cause them to jam. In the heat of a firefight, a jammed belt could be fatal. Crews learned to keep spare belts ready, but the process of swapping out boxes under fire was slow and exposed the loader to danger. Some tankers tried to pre-link longer belts, but the Army's official doctrine discouraged modifications, citing concerns about reliability and safety. Still, necessity drove innovation. In the autumn of 1944, as the Allies pushed through France and into the Low Countries, the tempo of combat increased. German counterattacks were fierce, and the need for sustained suppressive fire became critical. It was during this period that a young loader, his name lost to history, but his ingenuity remembered, began experimenting with a homemade solution. Using scraps of canvas, lengths of wire, and salvaged links from spent belts, he fashioned an extended ammunition belt that could feed the Browning for far longer than the standard issue. The design was crude but effective. Instead of stopping every few minutes to reload, the gun could now fire continuously for much longer stretches. The loader's crewmates were skeptical at first, joking about the Frankenstein belt and its patchwork appearance. Some worried it would jam or break at a critical moment. But the loader persisted, testing and refining his creation during lulls in the fighting. He watched how the belt fed through the gun, adjusted the tension, and reinforced weak points with extra stitching. Other crews took notice, some dismissing the idea, others quietly asking for advice. The loader's sergeant, a veteran of North Africa and Italy, was initially wary but recognized the potential. In a war where seconds could mean survival, any edge was worth considering. The Army's official stance on field modifications was ambivalent. Commanders valued discipline and standardization, but they also understood the realities of combat. Reports of successful improvisations filtered up the chain of command, sometimes earning quiet approval, sometimes drawing reprimands. The Red Ball Express, the legendary supply line that kept the Allied advance moving, was itself a testament to the power of adaptation and ingenuity. As the front lines shifted and the fighting grew more intense, the loader's homemade ammo belt became a symbol of the resourcefulness that defined the Allied war effort. It was not the product of a factory or a manual, but of necessity and imagination, a reminder that, in war, survival often depended on the courage to try something new. The stage was set for a moment when this simple invention would be put to the ultimate test, under the most unforgiving conditions the Western Front could offer. Inside a Sherman tank, the world shrank to steel walls, the thrum of the engine, and the faces of 4 other men. The crew was a family forged by necessity. Each member depended on the others for survival. The commander, perched in the turret, scanned the horizon for threats. The gunner, eyes pressed to the sight, waited for the next target. The loader, hands always busy, kept the main gun and machine guns fed. The driver and assistant driver, hunched over controls, navigated mud, rubble, and the ever-present threat of mines. Their days were a cycle of tension and routine. Mornings began with maintenance, checking tracks, cleaning weapons, and topping off fuel. Meals were quick affairs, eaten from tins or mess kits, often interrupted by the call to move out. Sleep came in snatches, stolen between bombardments or during long, cold nights in the field. Letters from home were rare treasures, read and reread until the paper wore thin. Humor was a shield against fear. The men joked about everything: the mud, the rations, the quirks of their tank. They gave nicknames to their Sherman, painted pin-up girls or slogans on the hull, and swapped stories about home. The loader with the homemade ammo belt became a source of both laughter and pride. His invention was a running joke, but also a point of curiosity. In the close quarters of the tank, every innovation was personal. If it worked, it could save lives. Tactical angle, the role of sustained machine gun. Fire on the battlefield. The Sherman's machine guns were more than just secondary weapons. They were lifelines. The 50 caliber Browning atop the turret was especially prized. Its heavy rounds could punch through walls, disable vehicles, and keep enemy infantry at bay. In ambushes or close-quarters fighting, the ability to lay down a curtain of fire could mean the difference between life and death. German tactics exploited the terrain. Hedgerows in Normandy, forests in the Ardennes, ruined villages across France and Belgium. Infantry with Panzerfausts or machine guns could appear suddenly, firing from cover and then melting away. The Sherman's main gun was slow to traverse and reload, but the machine gun could respond instantly, sweeping an area with fire and forcing the enemy to keep their heads down. Sustained fire was critical during counterattacks. When German troops launched sudden assaults, the ability to keep the Browning firing without constant pauses to reload was a tactical advantage. It bought time for infantry to regroup, for other tanks to maneuver, and for the crew to coordinate their next move. The standard 100-round belts were often exhausted in seconds during heavy fighting. Every pause to reload was a moment of vulnerability. The homemade ammo belt, with its extended capacity, changed the equation. Instead of frantic stops and starts, the gun could roar continuously, holding the line when it mattered most. The loader's innovation was not just a convenience, it was a force multiplier, amplifying the tank's defensive power and giving the crew a crucial edge in the chaos of battle. Technological angle. The design and limitations of standard ammo belts. The Browning M2's standard ammunition system was a product of industrial efficiency. Metal boxes, each holding a 100-round belt, were easy to transport and store. The belts themselves were made of linked cartridges, designed to feed smoothly through the gun's mechanism. In ideal conditions, the system worked well. But war was rarely ideal. Mud, dust, and vibration were constant enemies. Belts could twist or jam, links could break, and boxes could run dry at the worst possible moment. The process of swapping out boxes was awkward, especially in the cramped turret. The loader had to reach up, open the feed, remove the spent belt, and insert a new one, all while the tank rocked and shuddered under fire. Attempts to link multiple belts together were discouraged by official doctrine, which warned of increased risk of jams. But in practice, many crews experimented with longer belts, splicing them together with wire or tape. The homemade belt took this improvisation to a new level, using canvas, salvaged links, and careful stitching to create a belt that could feed the gun for far longer than standard issue. The result was a system that, while unconventional, proved remarkably reliable in the field. The loader's attention to detail, reinforcing weak points, testing the feed, and adjusting the tension made the difference. The homemade belt was not just a patch. It was a carefully crafted tool, born of necessity and refined by experience. Leadership. In the U.S. Army, during World War II was a balancing act between enforcing regulations and encouraging the kind of ingenuity that could tip the scales in battle. Official doctrine emphasized discipline, standardization, and adherence to established procedures. Yet, the realities of combat often demanded flexibility and quick thinking. When word of the homemade ammo belt began to circulate among the tank crews, reactions from officers were mixed. Some platoon leaders and company commanders, veterans of earlier campaigns in North Africa and Italy, recognized the value of field modifications. They had seen firsthand how a clever solution could save lives when the standard issue failed. These leaders quietly encouraged their men to adapt, as long as safety and reliability were not compromised. Others, more rigid in their thinking or wary of breaking regulations, were skeptical. They worried about the risk of jams, the potential for accidents, and the possibility of setting a precedent for unauthorized modifications. Reports of the homemade belt's success, however, began to filter up the chain of command. After the engagement, where the Sherman's machine gun fired for hours without pause, some officers took a closer look. They questioned the crew, inspected the belt, and weighed the risks against the undeniable results. In the end, the best leaders understood that survival on the front lines often depended on the courage to innovate. The German army in late 1944 was battered, but far from beaten. Their tactics were shaped by years of hard fighting and a deep understanding of the terrain. In the bocage of Normandy, the forests of the Ardennes, and the ruined towns of eastern France, German infantry and anti-tank teams used every advantage. They struck from ambush, using Panzerfausts, machine guns, and mortars to harass and destroy Allied armor. For Sherman crews, the threat was constant. A single well-placed shot could disable a tank, and German infantry often targeted the exposed machine gunner or loader. The ability to lay down sustained, accurate fire was essential, not just to suppress enemy attacks, but to protect the tank and its supporting infantry. The standard ammo belts, with their frequent reloads, left dangerous gaps in the Sherman's defensive fire. The homemade belt, by contrast, allowed the crew to maintain a steady stream of bullets, breaking up ambushes and forcing German troops to keep their distance. The Germans, for their part, quickly learned to respect the Shermans that could keep their guns firing. Reports from captured enemy soldiers spoke of tanks that seemed impossible to approach, their machine guns never falling silent. The psychological impact was real. Sustained fire not only inflicted casualties, but also sapped the enemy's will to fight. War is a crucible for character. The story of the homemade ammo belt is not just about technology or tactics. It is about the spirit of adaptation that defined the Allied effort. The loader who stitched together scraps and wire was not just solving a technical problem, he was taking a risk, challenging the status quo, and trusting his own judgment in the face of skepticism. This spirit was echoed across the front lines. Soldiers improvised repairs, invented new tools, and found ways to make do with what they had. Sometimes these innovations were celebrated, sometimes they were quietly tolerated, and sometimes they were punished. But in the end, it was this willingness to adapt, to see a problem and refuse to accept defeat, that helped the Allies overcome the challenges of a brutal, unpredictable war. The homemade ammo belt became a symbol of this ethos. It was a reminder that victory was not just a matter of numbers or firepower, but of human ingenuity and the courage to try something new. The loader's invention, born of necessity and refined by experience, would soon face its ultimate test in the crucible of battle, a test that would prove, beyond doubt, the value of thinking beyond the manual. November 1944. The Lorraine region of France is a patchwork of churned fields and shattered villages. The Allied advance has slowed to a crawl, bogged down by mud, rain, and fierce German resistance. The 4th Armored Division, spearheading the push toward Metz, finds itself locked in a brutal contest of attrition. Every hedgerow, every farmhouse, is a potential death trap. In the early hours of a gray morning, a Sherman tank, call sign Lucky 13, rumbles into position on the edge of a battered orchard. The crew is exhausted. They've been fighting for days with little rest, their nerves frayed by the constant threat of ambush. The loader, the same man who stitched together the now famous homemade ammo belt, checks his work one last time. The belt, a patchwork of canvas, wire, and salvaged links, snakes from a large ammo box up to the .50 caliber Browning on the turret. The tank commander scans the horizon through rain-streaked periscopes. Reports of a German counterattack have filtered in, infantry supported by half-tracks, and the ominous silhouette of a Panzer IV. The crew braces for contact. The gunner loads a high-explosive shell, the driver revs the engine, and the loader positions himself beneath the open hatch, ready to feed the machine gun. Suddenly, the orchard erupts in chaos. German mortars whistle overhead, exploding in muddy geysers. Small arms fire rattles against the Sherman's hull. Through the smoke, dark shapes move, enemy infantry, advancing in short, desperate bursts. The commander shouts orders, the main gun roars, and the loader swings the Browning into action. The homemade ammo belt proves its worth immediately. The .50 caliber spits fire, a steady, unbroken stream of bullets cutting through the morning gloom. The loader's hands move with practiced speed, guiding the belt, clearing the occasional jam, never letting the gun fall silent. The German infantry falters, pinned down by the relentless barrage. A half-track lurches into view, its machine gun chattering. The Sherman's main gun swings around, fires, and the vehicle erupts in flames. Minutes stretch into hours. The counterattack intensifies, then ebbs, then surges again. The loader's invention holds up. No frantic pauses to reload, no desperate scrambles for spare belts. The gunner and commander exchange glances of disbelief and gratitude. Outside, American infantry rally behind the tank, using its firepower as a shield to advance and reclaim lost ground. Word spreads quickly. Other tank crews, hunkered down in nearby positions, watch as Lucky 13 holds the line. The endless rattle of the Browning becomes a beacon, a signal that, for now, the enemy cannot break through. Infantrymen shout encouragement. Some even risk dashing forward to resupply the tank with more ammunition. The loader, sweat-soaked and grimy, barely notices. His focus is absolute. The gun must not stop. As dusk falls, the German attack finally breaks. Survivors melt back into the woods, leaving behind wrecked vehicles and wounded men. The battlefield is eerily quiet. The only sound the hiss of cooling metal and the distant rumble of retreating engines. The crew of Lucky 13 slumps in their seats, exhausted but alive. The homemade ammo belt, tattered but intact, lies coiled at the loader's feet, a silent testament to the day's ordeal. In the aftermath, officers tour the position, inspecting the battered Sherman and its crew. The loader's invention is no longer a joke. It is the reason they are still there, the reason the line held. Other crews gather around, asking questions, examining the belt, and quietly planning to make their own. The battle for Lorraine is far from over. But in this moment, the tide has turned. The courage to improvise, to trust in a homemade solution, has made all the difference. Night falls over the battered fields of Lorraine. The air is thick with the smell of cordite, churned earth, and the faint metallic tang of spent brass. Inside Lucky 13, the crew sits in silence, the adrenaline of battle slowly giving way to exhaustion. The loader, hands trembling, finally allows himself a moment to breathe. He looks down at the homemade ammo belt, frayed at the edges, stained with oil and sweat, but still in one piece. Outside, the camp is alive with quiet activity. Medics tend to the wounded, engineers repair damaged vehicles, and officers huddle over maps by lantern light. The story of the Sherman that held the line with a Frankenstein ammo belt spreads quickly. Infantrymen who had taken cover behind the tank during the worst of the fighting stop by to offer thanks. Some bring extra rations or cigarettes, small tokens of gratitude for the crew that kept the enemy at bay. The loader's invention becomes the talk of the battalion. Other tank crews, skeptical at first, now crowd around Lucky 13 to see the belt for themselves. They ask questions, take notes, and study the stitching and wire that held it together. Some begin to experiment with their own versions, using whatever materials they can scrounge from supply depots or abandoned vehicles. The loader, once the subject of jokes, is now a minor celebrity, his ingenuity recognized as a key factor in the day's survival. Commanders take notice as well. The company captain, a veteran with a reputation for pragmatism, calls the loader in for a debrief. He listens carefully as the young man explains how he built the belt, what problems he encountered, and how it performed under fire. The captain nods, makes a few notes, and quietly orders his staff to circulate the design to other crews. In a war where every advantage counts, even the smallest innovation can tip the balance. The loader's sergeant, who had once warned against fooling with army issue, now offers a rare word of praise. "You kept us alive today," he says simply. The words carry weight, echoing in the cramped confines of the tank. For the crew, the day's ordeal becomes a point of pride, a story to be retold in quieter moments, a reminder that survival often depends on the courage to try something new. As the days pass, the impact of the homemade ammo belt ripples outward. Other Shermans in the battalion begin to sport similar modifications. The supply sergeant, always on the lookout for useful scrounge, starts setting aside canvas, wire, and spare links for crews willing to experiment. The battalion's rate of sustained fire increases, and after-action reports note a marked improvement in the ability to repel enemy attacks. The loader's invention is not without its critics. Some officers, wary of unauthorized modifications, issue reminders about the importance of safety and standardization. But the results speak for themselves. In the next engagement, another Sherman holds off a German assault for nearly 2 hours. Its machine gun fed by a belt, inspired by Lucky 13. The loader's idea, once dismissed as a curiosity, becomes a quiet revolution. Proof that the front lines are often where the best ideas are born. For the crew of Lucky 13, the battle is a turning point. Their bond, already strong, is now unbreakable. They have faced death together and survived, not just through training or firepower, but through the ingenuity and determination of one of their own. The loader, once just another face in the turret, is now a symbol of the spirit that drives men to adapt, to overcome, and to endure. As winter settles over Lorraine, the war grinds on. The front lines shift, new challenges arise, and the men of the 4th Armored Division prepare for whatever comes next. But in the memory of those who were there, the day the homemade ammo belt kept a Sherman firing for 4 straight hours stands as a testament to the power of innovation and the quiet heroism of those who refuse to give up. The days after the battle brought a rare sense of calm to the battered men of the 4th Armored Division. The fields of Lorraine, once echoing with gunfire, now lay quiet beneath a cold, gray sky. For the crew of Lucky 13, the aftermath was a time of reflection, repair, and a growing realization that their ordeal had left a mark far beyond their own survival. Word of the homemade ammo belt spread quickly through the ranks. Tank crews from neighboring companies came to see the invention firsthand, eager to learn how a simple patchwork of canvas and wire had kept a Sherman's machine gun firing when others had fallen silent. The loader, once the butt of jokes, found himself fielding questions from grizzled veterans and green replacements alike. He demonstrated how to splice belts, reinforce weak points, and keep the feed smooth under pressure. In the evenings, small groups gathered around Lucky 13, swapping stories and sharing tips, the camaraderie of shared danger binding them together. The battalion's leadership took notice. After-action reports highlighted the role of sustained machine gun fire in repelling the German counterattack. Officers who had once been skeptical now quietly encouraged their crews to experiment with their own modifications, as long as safety was not compromised. The loader's sergeant, a man not given to praise, made a point of commending his initiative in front of the entire platoon. "Sometimes," he said, "the best solutions aren't in the manual." The impact of the homemade belt rippled outward. Other units in the division began to adopt similar modifications, and soon the idea spread even further, passed along by word of mouth, letters home, and the informal networks that connected tankers across the front. The supply sergeant, always resourceful, began setting aside extra canvas and wire for crews willing to try their hand at innovation. The battalion's ability to deliver sustained fire improved, and after-action reports noted a marked decrease in machine gun stoppages during critical engagements. Official recognition was slow to come. The Army, wary of endorsing unauthorized modifications, made no formal announcement. But within the ranks, the loader's invention became a quiet legend. A story told in mess tents and around campfires, a reminder that sometimes survival depends on the courage to break the rules. For the crew of Lucky 13, the aftermath was a time of pride and humility. They had survived a test that could have ended in disaster, and their bond was stronger for it. The loader, once just another face in the turret, was now a symbol of the ingenuity and determination that defined the best of the Allied war effort. But the war was not over. New battles loomed on the horizon, and the men of the 4th Armored Division knew that the lessons of Lorraine would be tested again and again. The homemade ammo belt, born of necessity and refined by experience, was now part of their arsenal, a tool, a talisman, and a testament to the power of adaptation. As winter deepened and the front lines shifted east, the story of the homemade ammo belt continued to ripple through the armored ranks. In the weeks that followed, more Shermans rolled into battle with improvised belts, each one a little different, some stitched from tent canvas, others reinforced with wire or leather straps. The loader's original design was copied, improved, and adapted to fit the needs of different crews and different tanks. What began as a single act of ingenuity became a quiet movement, spreading from one battalion to the next. The loader himself remained humble. He never sought recognition, content to see his idea help others survive. Letters from home began to mention the miracle belt that kept a Sherman firing for hours, and stories filtered back to stateside training camps, where instructors quietly encouraged new recruits to pay attention to the lessons learned in the field. The loader's name was rarely mentioned in official reports, but among the men who fought and bled in the steel hulls of their tanks, his reputation grew. The Army's higher command, ever cautious, took note of the trend. Some officers worried about the risks of unauthorized modifications. What if a belt jammed at a critical moment or caused a catastrophic failure? Yet, the evidence from the front was hard to ignore. After-action reports consistently showed that tanks equipped with extended belts were more likely to maintain suppressive fire, repel enemy assaults, and support infantry advances. Quietly, some supply officers began to requisition extra materials, and a few forward-thinking commanders even requested official studies on improving the standard ammunition feed. For the men on the ground, the homemade belts became a symbol of something larger. They represented the spirit of adaptation that defined the Allied war effort, the willingness to bend the rules, to trust in the experience and creativity of ordinary soldiers. In a war where so much depended on mass production and standardization, the success of the homemade belt was a reminder that victory also depended on the courage to innovate. As the war in Europe drew to a close, the story of the loader and his invention faded into the background of 1,000 other tales of survival and ingenuity. Some crews kept their belts as souvenirs, reminders of the day when a simple idea made all the difference. Others passed them on to new recruits, along with the advice to never be afraid to try something new. In the years that followed, the lessons of Lorraine would echo in the training manuals and field guides of a new generation. The loader's homemade belt was never officially adopted, but its legacy endured in the stories told by veterans, in the quiet pride of those who survived, and in the enduring truth that, in war, the smallest act of courage can change the course of a battle. War is often remembered for its grand strategies, its sweeping offensives, and the names of generals etched into history. Yet, beneath the thunder of artillery and the clash of armies, it is the small acts of ingenuity, the quiet courage to adapt, that so often tip the balance between survival and loss. The story of the homemade ammo belt is not just about a single tank or a single battle. It is about the spirit that animated thousands of ordinary soldiers, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. In the mud and chaos of Lorraine, one loader's refusal to accept the limits of standard issue became a lifeline for his crew and a lesson for all who witnessed it. His hands, raw from work and trembling with fatigue, stitched together more than just canvas and wire. He stitched together hope, resilience, and the will to endure. For the men of Lucky 13, and for countless others who followed their example, the homemade belt was a symbol of what it meant to fight not just with weapons, but with wits. It was a reminder that the difference between defeat and victory can hinge on the willingness to try, to risk, and to believe in the value of one's own ideas. Even when others laugh, as the guns fell silent and the world began to rebuild, the legacy of such moments endured. The loader's invention was never celebrated in parades or written into official doctrine, but it lived on in the stories told by those who survived. It stands as a quiet testament to the power of adaptation, the necessity of courage, and the enduring truth that, in the crucible of war, the human spirit is the greatest weapon of all.